Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is Daniel, and if it weren't for the security camera in my car, I'd still be living a lie. I'd have gone on believing my marriage was unshakable, that my wife, Laura, was as devoted to me as I was to her. But once I saw the truth, there was no unseeing it, no way to rewind and pretend everything was fine. Before I dive into what happened, I want you to pause and think. How well do you really know the person sleeping next to you? Could they be hiding a whole other life right there in plain sight? I used to swear Laura would never betray me. Yet here I am, spilling this story. So stick with me until the end. I'm curious what you'd do if you were me. Would you handle like I did, or take a different path? Let's get started. Laura and I have been married for 8 years. I never had a shred of doubt about her. To me, love meant trust, not snooping around or second-guessing. You take your partner at their word, and that's that. For 8 years, that belief held strong. I run a logistics company, which means I'm on the road a lot. Some weeks, I'm gone for a day or two. Other times, it's a full month. It's not perfect, but the money's good, and I always made sure Laura had everything she needed. When I was home, I was all hers, present, attentive, making up for lost time. I'd just gotten back from a grueling 10-day trip. Endless meetings, red-eye flights, and barely a moment to breathe. All I wanted was to crash at home with Laura and recharge. The next day, I figured I'd take my Audi Q8 out for a quick run to the store. Nothing big, just a chance to clear my head. But as soon as I turned the key, something fell off. The engine sputtered, rougher than usual, not the smooth purr I was used to. Then a warning light blinked on the dashboard. Service required. That made no sense. I'd had the car checked top to bottom before I left. It was pristine when I hit the road. So why was it acting up now? Unless something happened while I was away. I walked back into the house, finding Laura in the living room, sipping coffee and flipping through a magazine. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Did you take the Audi out while I was gone?" She didn't even flinch. "Yeah, I drove it to see a friend," she replied, barely looking up. No elaboration, no fuss. It sounded simple enough. Why would I push it? "It's just a car," I told myself. If she needed to borrow it, fine. I nodded and let it go, no suspicions nagging at me. At least, not yet. But that rough engine wouldn't leave my mind. I was pissed, mostly at the shop that supposedly serviced it. I drove straight there, storming in like a man on a mission. The mechanic, a stocky guy in his 40s with oil-streaked hands, was behind the counter. "What kind of job did you do on my car?" I snapped. "I brought it in right before my trip, paid you to keep it perfect, and now it's choking like it hasn't been touched in a year. What's the deal?" He didn't snap back or make excuses, just wiped his brow and gave me a calm, almost tired look. Without a word, he ambled over to the Audi, popped the hood, and started poking around. I stood there, arms crossed, steam practically coming out of my ears. I don't know what you guys screwed up, but this is insane. I paid good money for that service. He didn't respond, just kept working, his tools clinking softly as he ran a diagnostic. I was waiting for him to admit they'd botched it, maybe a loose wire or a cheap part, but he stayed quiet. After a few minutes, he plugged a scanner into the car system, then moved to the infotainment screen, navigating the menus like it was second nature. I figured he'd finally explain the engine trouble, but instead, he turned to me and said something that stopped me cold. "You might want to check your dash cam," he said, his voice low and careful. It caught something interesting after we serviced it. I blinked, thrown off balance. "What?" He didn't meet my eyes right away, his fingers still tapping the screen. When he finally looked up, his face was blank, unreadable. "Your car's got a security camera, right?" "I'd take a look at the footage if I were you." Could be enlightening. My anger about the engine fizzled out, replaced by a knot of confusion. What was he getting at? This wasn't about spark plugs or oil changes. I could feel it. Something bigger was lurking. I pulled out my phone, hands shaky as I opened the dashcam app. My finger hovered over the latest clips. I had no clue what I was about to see, but the mechanic's tone told me it wasn't good. The first recording loaded. Laura unlocking the Audi, sliding into the driver's seat, and pulling out of our driveway. Normal enough. She'd said she went to a friend's place. I watched her cruise down familiar streets, heading toward her friend Sarah's house, just like she'd told me. I exhaled, thinking maybe this was nothing. But then another clip rolled right after, and everything shifted. This time, Laura wasn't alone. Sarah was in the passenger seat, and another woman I vaguely recognized sat in the back. They were laughing, loud and carefree, decked out in flashy outfits, way too dressed up for a casual hangout. My brow furrowed. Laura hadn't mentioned a group outing. She'd said it was just a quick visit, nothing more. I watched them peel out of Sarah's driveway and head downtown. I knew the route. They were aiming for a Trinity Bar district in Raleigh. I paused the video, my mind scrambling. If this was just a fun night out, why hadn't she said anything? It didn't add up, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. The third clip loaded, and it flipped my world upside down. The third clip started playing, and my chest tightened. The timestamp showed it was hours later, well past midnight. Laura was still in my Audi, but Sarah and the other woman were gone. Instead, there was a guy I didn't know sitting in the passenger seat. They were parked in some dimly lit lot, the kind where streetlights barely reach. The camera's night vision caught enough. Too much, really. Laura and this stranger were leaning close, their faces inches apart, murmuring something the mic couldn't pick up. Then, without a beat, she kissed him. Not a peck, not a mistake, a deep, hungry kiss. My stomach lurched as their hands started wandering, bodies pressing together like they'd been waiting for this all night. They pulled back for a second, laughing softly, and Laura handed him keys. He slid into the driver's seat, and they took off. The next turn they made was toward a cheap motel off the highway. I sat there, phone in hand, frozen. My mind couldn't keep up with what my eyes had just seen. Hours earlier on that same night, I'd called Laura from my hotel room in Chicago, just checking in like always. "What are you up to?" I'd asked. "Oh, just chilling at home," she'd said, her voice steady as ever. She'd lied, effortlessly, like it was nothing. I should have been listening to the mechanic, who was now muttering something about a clogged air filter causing the engine stutter, but his words were a distant hum. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. If that dash cam hadn't recorded this, I'd have come home, hugged her, shared a bed with her, and never suspected a thing. Now, the truth was staring me in the face, and there was no escaping it. That night, I sat across from Laura in our dining room. The house was quiet except for the faint tick of the wall clock. She was scrolling through her phone, oblivious, while I watched her every move. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone even. "How was your week while I was gone?" She glanced up briefly. "Fine, nothing special." I nodded, playing along. "Did you do anything fun?" She hesitated, just a flicker, but then shook her head. "Nah, I stayed in, took it easy." Another lie, delivered straight to my face without a hint of shame. I let the silence stretch, then set my phone on the table, unlocked it, and hit play. The footage rolled, Laura pulling the Audi out of our driveway. Her head jerked toward the screen, eyes widening. "What's this?" she asked, her voice thinning. I didn't answer, just let it play. The next clip showed her with Sarah and their friend, all glammed up, laughing as they headed downtown. I glanced at her. She was blinking fast, lips parting like she was scrambling for a story. "It's not what it looks like," she mumbled, barely audible. I stayed silent, skipping to the next part. There she was in that empty lot, tangled up with that guy, kissing him like I didn't exist. That's when she cracked. She shot up from her chair. "Daniel, wait, let me explain." Her hands were trembling, her voice desperate. "I was drunk, okay? I wasn't thinking." I didn't respond, just fast-forwarded to them driving off toward the motel. She collapsed back in her seat, hands over her face. "I screwed up," she whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. I was wasted." I stared at her, feeling a cold disgust settle in. Drunk? That was her excuse? The woman I trusted with my life wanted me to believe she just stumbled into cheating because of a few drinks? I leaned back, my voice low. "So, what? You turn into someone else when you're drunk. That's supposed to make this okay." She flinched, but didn't fight back. And that's when it hit me. She was too smooth with the lies, too comfortable. This probably wasn't the first time. If the camera hadn't caught her, would she have ever come clean, or just kept smiling at me while living this double life? I looked at her, this woman I'd built 8 years with, and realized she was a stranger. How many other nights had she fed me the same, "I'm home," lying while doing God knows. The more I thought about it, the more the anger burned. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a demolition of everything I believed in. For the next few days, I was a mess inside, but kept it locked down. Laura tried to talk to me, teary apologies, promises to make it right, but I barely heard her. I kept replaying the footage in my head, her laugh with that guy, the ease of her lies. I wanted to believe there was a way to salvage this, but every time I looked at her, I saw that parking lot. Trust doesn't bounce back from something like that. Not when it's shattered so completely. By the fifth day, I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo. I had to decide what came next, and it wasn't going to be pretty. By the fifth day, I couldn't take the limbo anymore. My head was a war zone. Part of me wanted to scream, another part just wanted to walk away and never look back. Laura kept hovering, her eyes red from crying, throwing out apologies like they could stitch us back together. "I'll do anything, Daniel," she'd say, her voice shaky. It was a stupid mistake, but those words just echoed hollow. A mistake? Maybe if she'd spilled wine on the couch, sure. This was a choice, a series of choices, and she'd made them without a second thought about me. I needed to end this, one way or another. That evening, I called her into the kitchen. She shuffled in, looking like she already knew something heavy was coming. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sweater, bracing herself. I didn't drag it out. "We're done," I said, flat and final. Her face crumpled, but I kept going. "You've got two options. One, we handle this quietly. Divorce, no mess, you leave, and that's it. Or two, you fight me on it, and I'll let everyone see the footage. Your call." I slid my phone across the counter, the dash cam app still open, a silent threat. Her eyes darted to it, panic flashing as she realized what I meant. If that video got out, her friends, her family, her perfect little world, it'd all collapse. She opened her mouth, probably to beg or spin another excuse, but then shut it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. After a long, tense silence, she nodded, barely a whisper. "Okay, I'll go." No argument, no defense, just acceptance. The next morning, she started packing. I didn't stick around to watch. I heard the rustle of clothes, the zip of suitcases, but I stayed in the garage, tinkering with tools I didn't need to use. There was no big farewell, no dramatic plea to stay. She just loaded her stuff in her car and drove off. When I heard the engine fade, I felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, just empty. She was gone, and so was the life I'd thought we had. The days after she left were strange. The house felt too big, too quiet. I'd catch myself staring at the spot where her shoes used to sit by the door, or the empty hook where her coat hung. But the real mess wasn't the silence. It was what her betrayal did to me inside. If Laura, the woman I'd given everything to, could lie so easily, what did that say about trust? About love? Starting over with someone new felt impossible. How do you let her guard down after that? The idea of dating again, of risking this kind of gut punch all over, made me want to lock the door and never open it. So I didn't. Instead, I threw myself into work. My logistics company became my lifeline. Shipments don't cheat. Deadlines don't lie. I could control that world, track every package, predict every outcome. I started taking on extra projects, working late into the night, anything to keep my mind off the wreckage Laura left behind. It wasn't healthy, probably, but it worked. The numbers added up, the profits climbed, and for a while, that was enough. I didn't have to think about her laugh in that parking lot or the way she'd looked me in the eye and lied. Work was my shield, and I clung to it like a drowning man to a raft. But late at night, when the house was still and the laptop was off, the thoughts crept in. How long had you been doing this? Was it just that one guy, or were there others? I've been on the road so much, Charlotte, Atlanta, Dallas, busting my ass to build a life for us while she what? Partied? Slept around? The footage only showed one night, but it opened a door I couldn't close. Every memory of her girls' nights or quiet evenings at home now felt like a question mark. Had she been playing me for years, or was this a one-off? I'd never know for sure, and that ate at me. Trust wasn't just broken, it was obliterated, and I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. A week later, I was at the shop again, picking up the Audi after the mechanic fixed the air filter issue. He didn't bring up the footage, smart guy, but as he handed me the keys, he gave me a look almost pitying. "Take care, man," he said, and I just nodded. Driving home, I kept the radio off, letting the hum of the engine fill the silence. I wasn't ready to face the big questions yet, like what came next, or if I'd ever let someone in again. For now, I'd keep moving, keep working, keep the pieces of myself together. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, just the end of hers and mine. With Laura gone, the house turned into a shell, empty in a way I couldn't ignore. I'd walk past the living room and half expect to see her curled up on the couch, phone in hand, like nothing had ever happened. But she wasn't there, and the quiet started to feel like a weight. Work kept me sane, or at least distracted. I'd pour hours into logistics reports, chasing new contracts, anything to drown out the questions gnawing at me. How long had she been lying? Was that guy in the car the only one? The dash cam gave me a glimpse, but it didn't tell the whole story, just enough to ruin everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been a fool, blind to whatever she'd been hiding while I was crisscrossing the country for my job. I tried to rebuild some kind of routine. Mornings, I'd hit the gym, lifting weights until my arms burned, trying to sweat out the anger. Afternoons and nights were for work, hunched over my desk until my eyes stung. Friends noticed I'd gone quiet, but I brushed them off. Just busy, I'd say, and they didn't push. Truth was, I didn't want to talk about it. Saying it out loud, Laura cheated, Laura's gone, made it too real, and I wasn't ready to face that yet. The footage was proof enough. I didn't need pitying looks or "you'll find someone else" pep talks. I wasn't sure I even wanted to. One night, about a month after she left, I cracked open a beer and sat on the back porch, staring at the dark yard. The silence got to me, and for the first time, I let myself really think about what came next. Could I trust again? Laura had been my rock, or so I'd thought. 8 years, and I never doubted her until that damn camera showed me the truth. Now, the idea of letting someone new in felt like handing them a loaded gun. What if they pulled the trigger too? I took a long swig, the cold bottle sweating in my hand. Maybe love just wasn't worth the risk. Not for me. Not anymore. Work stayed my escape, and it paid off. The company landed a big client in Nashville, and I threw myself into the details, routes, schedules, profit margins. It was something I could control, something that wouldn't turn around and stab me in the back. Late nights at the office became my norm, the glow of spreadsheets a weird kind of comfort. Colleagues started joking I'd married the job, and I'd laugh it off, but they weren't wrong. It was easier than facing the mess Laura left. Numbers don't whisper lies in your ear or sneak off to motels with strangers. Still, the cracks showed up eventually. One evening, I was grabbing coffee at a diner near the office, some hole-in-the-wall spot with chipped mugs and greasy tables. A couple walked in, laughing, hands tangled together, and I felt this sharp pang I couldn't name. Not jealousy, exactly. More like a reminder of what I'd lost, or maybe what I'd never really had. I watched them slide into a booth, all smiles, and wondered if they'd make it, or if one of them was already hiding something. I tossed a few bucks on the counter and left, the coffee sour in my mouth. That's when I knew work wouldn't bury this forever. I'd have to deal with it someday. A few weeks later, I ran into Sarah, Laura's friend from that night in the footage, at a gas station. She froze when she saw me, clutching her keys like she might bolt. I didn't plan to say anything, but she spoke first. "Hey, Daniel, I'm so sorry about everything." Her voice was small, guilty. I just nodded, not sure what she expected me to say. "Did you know?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not that night, no. But she'd been off for a while. I should have said something." I stared at her, the pieces clicking. Laura hadn't just slipped up once. She'd been off, whatever that meant. Sarah mumbled another apology and hurried off, leaving me with more questions I'd never get answers to. Driving home, I gripped the wheel too tight, the Audi humming beneath me. Sarah's words stuck. Laura had been drifting, and I'd missed it. All those trips I took, all those nights I trusted her, and she'd been pulling away. Maybe it wasn't just one motel guy. Maybe it was a pattern, and I'd been too busy, or too naive, to see it. The anger flared again, but underneath it was something worse. Doubt. Not just in her, but in myself. How do you move forward when you can't even trust your own judgment? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to try again. Not yet. Months passed, and the dust from Laura's exit started to settle, but the scars didn't fade. The house stayed quiet, a hollow echo of what it used to be. I'd boxed up the last of her stuff, random trinkets, a scarf she'd left in the closet, and shoved it into storage. Out of sight, but not out of mind. Work kept me afloat, the company thriving as I buried myself in it. Clients praised my focus, my drive, but they didn't see the truth. I wasn't driven, I was running. Running from the empty bed, the unanswered questions, the nagging fear that I'd never trust anyone again. It worked, mostly until it didn't. One Saturday, I was at a bar with a couple of buddies from work. They dragged me out, insisting I needed a break. I wasn't in the mood, but I went anyway, nursing a whiskey at the counter. Across the room, a woman caught my eye. Dark hair, sharp smile, chatting with her friends. She glanced my way, and for a second, I felt that old spark, the kind I hadn't felt since Laura. But then my mind flashed to the dash cam footage, Laura's laugh, that guy's hands, and the spark died. I turned back to my drink, the ice clinking against the glass. My buddy Mike noticed. "You okay, man?" he asked. I shrugged. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't buy it, but he let it go. I wasn't ready to admit I couldn't even flirt without second-guessing everything. That night stuck with me. I wanted to move on, really I did, but every step forward felt like walking into a trap. Laura's betrayal wasn't just a single blow, it rewired me. I catch myself analyzing people, coworkers, strangers, wondering what they were hiding. Trust used to come easy. Now it felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I kept replaying Sarah's words at the gas station. She'd been off for a while. How long was a while? How many lies had I swallowed? The footage was a snapshot, but the full picture stayed blurry, and that's what haunted me most. I'd never know the whole truth. Still, life didn't stop. Spring rolled into Raleigh, and the city buzzed with new energy. I started small, grabbing coffee with friends, hitting a baseball game, letting the world back in bit by bit. One afternoon, I was at a park, watching kids chase each other while their parents laughed. A woman sat on a bench nearby, reading, and we ended up talking. Nothing big, just the weather, the book she held. She smiled, easy and warm, and I didn't feel that instant wall go up. It wasn't a date, wasn't even a flirtation, but it was something. A crack in the armor. Maybe I wasn't ready for love, but I could handle a conversation without assuming she'd lie to my face. Work slowed down too, not by choice, but because I forced it. I hired an assistant, delegated more, gave myself room to breathe. The long hours had kept me sane, but they'd also kept me stuck. One night, I sat on the porch again, beer in hand, and let myself think about the future. Not just the next contract, but what I wanted long-term. I wasn't naive enough to think love was off the table forever. Someday, I'd meet someone who'd prove it didn't always end in a parking lot with a stranger. But that day wasn't today. I was still picking up the pieces, figuring out who I was without Laura's shadow over me. So here's where I land you. What would you do if this was your story? Picture it. You find that footage, see your partner with someone else, hear the lies unravel. Would you walk away like I did, cut it clean, and start over? Or would you try to fix it, give them a chance to explain? Could you forgive a betrayal that deep, or would it change you like it changed me? I don't think I could have stayed, even if I'd wanted to. Every time I look at her, I'd see that motel turn, that laugh, and the trust would stay dead. But maybe you're different, stronger, or more forgiving. I want to know. If you've got thoughts, drop them below. And if you know someone stuck in a relationship with red flags waving, send this their way. Let them see how fast trust can shatter when the truth sneaks out. If you stuck with me this far, give it a like. It helps more than you'd think. Before I go, here's the last thing I'll leave you with. The truth doesn't hide forever. It'll find a way out, whether it's a dash cam or a slip-up or just dumb luck. Mine came through a car, didn't even think to check. What's yours going to be?